Hello, welcome to the Maya Toolbelt. This is Michael. In this video, I wanted to go over attaching objects to a path and having them flow along the path. This is considered a motion path. You can find motion path controls under the Constrain menu in the Animation menu set. Constrain motion paths. And then we have a few options here. We have Attach to motion path, Flow path object, and Set motion path key. The main thing we'll be looking at today is Attach to motion path. All right, let's go into the options here and take a look at what we have. I'm just going to go to Edit, Reset Settings, just to make sure we're all at our default settings here, and pull this down just to get all the settings available in our view. So there's lots of settings here, but first of all, before we can really do anything with this, we need to have two things. We need to have a curve that will serve as the motion path, and then something to flow along the motion path. So let me close this for now. And let's first create the path. Go to Create, Curve Tools, and you can use a CV Curve Tool. In the options here, I'm just going to make sure I reset the Curve Tool because I have been playing with the curves lately. So I want to make sure that they are reset. So next we can make a path. And you can do this any way you wish. I'm just going to go to the front view here, and I'll just start placing points to create a path. Now because I'm in the front view, all my points are in a flat plane like this. So I'm going to select the control vertices. I'm going to press the B key, which turns on soft selection. Hold down B and drag to increase the scale of my brush. However, if I go into the Move Tool options, go down here to soft selection. Instead of fall off mode being a volume, I want it to be the surface. Let's try that. So hold down B, middle click and drag. And you can see instead of encompassing all of these points over here, it's only following the path of the curve. So I need to increase this up quite a bit. Let's see, here's my fall off radius slider. Down here I can just use this and be a bit more precise with it. So what I want to do, here we go, is select most of the points and just pull it out this way. So now with this soft selection turned on, and because I have fall off mode on a surface, it's flowing along the surface, and I can pull them out like this and create a more three-dimensional path. Press B again to turn off soft select. I can close that. So here's my path for now. So I can move this over here. And I think I'll turn off the grid for now. Okay, so here's my motion path. Next, I'll need something to flow along the motion path, whether it be a spaceship or an asteroid or whatever you want to do. I'll just make a cone. So here's my cone. This will act as my representative spaceship or whatever it is. I'll just reshape it a little bit. So this is my spaceship, and we'll just assume for the sake of this that the point of the spaceship up here is the front, and this is the thrust or rocket engine back. Now I do want to have something to specify the top of the spaceship. So what I think I'm going to do is just grab some vertices like this, and I'll go to the modeling menu set, edit mesh, and let's do a bevel. And there's our rocket ship, I think. Again, just to be kind of stupid, edit mesh, extrude. And there's our big rocket in the back of the spaceship. Okay, I think that's enough playing around. So here's our spaceship. I'm just going to delete its history and leave it at that. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I need to attach my spaceship to the motion path, and then it will flow along this path. Makes sense? Now, in order to use any kind of animation control, I'll need my animation playback controls in the UI. So now I'll go to Windows, UI Elements. I'll just break this off, and I'll turn on the time slider and the range slider. And I'll close that. You can see here I have my scene is currently set up to run at 24 frames per second, which is kind of like film. You can change this however you want. I'll just go to 30 frames per second. And when I do change it to 30 frames per second, I always get this little bit of an error where the ones become 1.25. I'll just fix that real quick. All right, now we're ready to roll. So, motion paths. Again, let's go back to the animation menu set. They have the constrain menu, motion paths, attached to motion path. Whenever you do mouse over commands in Maya, if you look down in the bottom left of the screen, there's the help line. And the help line is very helpful. It'll tell you a lot of information, and it's very easy to miss. But just by mousing over the command attached to motion path, the help line tells me select objects to animate along a motion path followed by the motion path. So first I need to select the spaceship, hold shift, and select the path. With those selected, I'll go to constrain, motion paths, attach to motion path, options. So here in the options we can do lots of things. Let me reset the settings again just to make sure they're defaults. And we have a few things to look at first. First of all is the time range. You can choose to have the range be associated with the time slider, choose a start, or choose the start and the end. If you go with time slider, what it's going to do is look at the time slider the way it is now. Currently it's starting at frame 1 and ending at frame 150, and it will use that range of frames. If you say start, it will let you specify a frame to start on, but then end it at the end of the time slider. And if you choose start/end, you can specify exactly when and where the start and end times should be. So for now, just to keep it relatively simple, I'll just go 1 to 100. We are at 30 frames per second, so that's a little bit more than 3 seconds of animation. So start time at 1, end time at 100. We do have some other options here. Parametric length, checkbox on or off. We have the follow checkbox on or off. Then we have front axis XYZ and up axis XYZ, world up type, world up vector, and some other things down here. Inverse up, inverse front, bank, all sorts of stuff. A lot of these we're going to get into after we actually attach the ship to the path so that we can see the changes that happen. So I'm just going to leave everything here at the default values and hit attach. So immediately, two things happen. First of all, the spaceship moved to the front of the curve. Now how is this the front of the curve? I started with this point, drew the curve out to this point. So that is the flow of or the direction of the curve. So whenever I attached it, it immediately went to the beginning of the curve. If I were to go to the modeling menu set with the curve selected and say curves, reverse direction, you can see how the ship will flip over to the other end of the curve because now this is the beginning of the curve and the ship will flow in this direction until frame 100, which you can see here the number 100 as well as the number 1 at the ends of the curve. I'll go back and go to curves, reverse direction again, just to put it back over here to the left. I just want to make sure you understood that if you wanted to change the direction your object flows along the curve, you would need to reverse the curve's direction. Let's go back to the animation menu and let's see what we got. So first and foremost, the spaceship, it's attached to the curve. When I select it, you can see the translate XYZ as well as the rotate XYZ are all marked with a yellow box here indicating that they are being affected by other things in the scene. If I were to move this over here, and press play, you can see that it snaps back to the curve. If I rewind the animation, it goes back to the beginning. So I can scrub through the time slider here, and you can see how the spaceship flows along the path like this. So another thing that we can notice right off the bat is that the ship is not oriented correctly. We have those tail fins on it for a reason, and that is to help us know where the top of the ship is, the point is where the front of the ship is, the booster in the back, and so on. So what we want to have happen is for the ship to be pointing in the direction the curve is flowing and have these tail fins oriented correctly. So that's when we can get into more of the options that we saw at the beginning. If I hit Control A to open the attribute editor with my ship selected, you can see here I have a Motion Path 1 tab that I can click on to select. So a few things in here to take a note of. First is the U value, and you can see it's highlighted in red. This is a keyframed attribute of the object. As I scrub through the time slider and I let go of this, you can see how the U value changes. As it goes further, U value continues to increase until we get all the way to frame 100, and you see the U value is at 1. So this U value is going from 0 to 1 along the entire path of the curve, and that's important, and we're going to get to that in a little bit as to exactly what all that means. We have here the Parametric Length checkbox. If I open up the Constrain Motion Paths, Attach to Motion Path options, you can see a lot of the same things between these two. So Parametric Length checkbox, we have that same checkbox here. We're going to get back to that in a minute. We have the Follow checkbox, World Up Type, World Up Vector, Inverse Up, Inverse Front, all these same types of checkboxes. They're in different orders, and sometimes they'll have different names, which is a little confusing. But these are all these settings here that we can play with after the fact. That if I pull this down, you can see bank scale, bank limit, and so on. So same settings that we can find here can be found in the attribute editor after you've attached the ship and can be changed after you've attached the ship. What can't necessarily be changed as easily is the settings at the top here, the start and end time and time slider and so on. They can be changed, don't get me wrong, they're just not as easily changed. So I'm going to close this now that we understand what these settings are here. So I need to fix the ship's orientation so that it flows along the path in the orientation that I want. So here we go, front axis. Right now it's set to the x-axis. So right now, if I zoom in on my ship and look at my move tool handle, currently my move tool is set to world mode. If I hold down the W key and then left click while I'm holding W, so I have W and left mouse button both held down, these are my move tool options. I can change this to be oriented to the object mode instead of world mode. So I'm going to highlight object and let go, and you see my move tool reorients itself to be oriented with the object. So front axis here is set to X direction, and you can see how the X red handle is what's pointing in the front. So I actually want the Y axis to be the front, so I need to change front axis instead of being X to Y. So now you can see it's halfway right, but not quite there yet. So right now up axis is also Y, and what I actually want is the red X handle, which is pointing in the same direction as my tail fin, to be up. So I'm going to change this to X. And now you can see, just by making those two changes, front axis to Y, up axis to X, my ship is now oriented correctly. You may have to do a couple more things, but depending on how your object is oriented. For example, you may have to inverse up. If I check this box, you can see how my ship will flip over if I needed that to happen to make it upright. There's also inverse front in case it was pointing the wrong direction along the y-axis. I can inverse the front. In my case, inversing up or front was not necessary. Just specifying which axis I wanted works just fine. So now that I have my ship oriented right, I can hit play. It zooms along. So mine's playing a little bit fast. And remember, 1 to 100 frames should be a little bit more than 3 seconds. And I can tell just by hitting play here, this is going much faster than that. So I need to check my playback speed. If I click on my little orange running guide button down here, this actually goes to the animation preferences window. If I click this, scroll down here, I have playback speed is play every frame. What I actually want is for it to play at 30 frames per second times 1. which means at 30 frames per second. If I click on that and hit save, rewind it and hit play, now it's playing more at real speed of a little bit more than 3 seconds for it to get from point 1 to point 100 here. And that right there is the gist of how you attach an object to a motion path. Pretty much that's all there is to it. But of course, like we do here at the Maya Toolbelt, we're going to delve into this a little bit deeper, learn more about how to control the path, how to control the object on the path, and look at more of those options and what they do. If you're interested in that, please feel free to stick around. So we have our ship flowing along the path, which is all well and good. I'm going to hit stop for now. Select my ship again. Let's go back to the attributes. So front axis and up axis, inverse up, inverse front. We kind of understand what those do. Now there's this checkbox for bank. Now what banking means is whenever the ship goes around a curve, it will actually bank like you would expect an airplane or something to do. If I click on the bank option and then scrub through here, as I scrub through here and then I turn on or off bank, you can see the difference. And like I said, it's kind of so subtle right now. Let me turn bank on, and we have two options here. We have bank scale and bank limit. Bank scale right now is set to 1. If I were to hold down control, left click and drag in this bank scale setting, you can see how it increases the amount of banking that's happening in the scene. Let me undo that for now. So the biggest kind of angled curve we have is probably right through here, aside from this one. So what I would expect to have happen is for the ship to kind of bank this way while it runs along that curve. So we can increase or decrease the bank scale. So now I've increased it, or in this case, decreased it slightly to a negative number. But as it goes around this curve, it banks to the left like this and then straightens up. And you can see as it goes around this curve, how it banks to the right and straightens up a bit. It might be a bit of extreme bank scale. We might want to make it a little bit more subtle, like so. Now the bank limit is set to 90 degrees, and essentially means that it won't bank any more than 90 degrees at any given time, even if your curve is set so steep at an angle that it, based on the bank scale that we have, it would bank further than 90 degrees. The bank limit would prevent that. So banking, bank scale, bank limit, front twist, up twist, and side twist. What do those values mean? Let's go back to the beginning here. Again, you can hold down control, left click and drag on any of these input boxes to treat them like a slider. So we have our front twist. You can see as I increase or decrease the front twist, the ship kind of twists in place. There's the up twist and the side twist. Again, this is kind of a way of fine-tuning your object if it's not quite oriented on the curve exactly how you want. These are also animatable. You can keyframe these. If I right-click on one and say Set Key, you can keyframe something. You can keyframe almost anything in that way. Right-click Front Axis and Set Key if I wanted to have the axis that is the front of the ship change for any reason. So you can keyframe these twisting controls. If you wanted to get some sort of turbulence on your path, you can keyframe these twisting attributes to do so without having to do some other kind of weird control to make this ship move off of the curve. Now, speaking of having the ship move off of the curve, one trick you can use is if you group the ship first and then have the group attached to the curve, then the ship itself could move freely around the curve and the group would maintain its path along the curve. That's just something to think about if you ever want to do something more complex with this in the future. Okay, so we're kind of going up the list of attributes here, but here there's the follow checkbox, and it's on by default. If I turn this off, you can see all this stuff grays out, and as I scrub through the animation, the ship no longer follows the path. It just stays oriented the same direction it was at the beginning. And most of the time, you don't really want that. I mean, it happens, but most of the time, you want to turn follow on just for the sake of allowing the ship to turn and follow the course of the shape of the path. So world up type, here is vector. Then we have a world up vector of x, y, and z. Right now, world up vector is set to 1 in the y-axis. You're talking about which direction in the world are we considering up right now. And right now, the world up type is set to vector, which means we can specify with these numbers where up is. And we're specifying with a value of 0 in x, 1 in y, and 0 in z that up is in the y-axis, positive y-axis. If I were to change this to -1, for example, you can see our ship flips upside down because it thinks that up is now the opposite direction. And so if we wanted the inverse up, we could to make it flip back up, or we can just keep it the way it is with the world up vector. Now you can, of course, change this. You could say scene up. If I choose scene up, nothing really happens because my scene's up is the positive y-axis. You can say object up, and so object up, in this case, flips the ship over based on the up axis that the object thinks is up. You can also specify an object to use as the world up object. Like if you don't want the ship itself to use its own up as the direction that is considered up. If you had a cube in the scene, for example, this cube is called P cube shape 1. I can Control C to copy that name, go back to the motion path, paste that in here, and hit enter. And you can see how my ship changed direction because now it's using the cube's axis, the cube's orientation for what is considered up. The cube's orientation is driving the ship's up axis. Undoing, you can see that when I take away the cube, how the ship changes direction, put it back on, the cube now orients itself based on what the cube's up axis is. And then there's object rotation up. If I click on that, again, you have a world up object you can specify, but then you also have the world up vector. So you can, for example, change which direction is up for that object. It's very, in my eyes, you can get very specific and very complex. If you're just looking for something simple, you can keep it relatively simple with a vector set to up. So the normal world up type, if you choose that, what it actually is doing is it's trying to, it will match the normal direction of the curve as it flows along it. So if I were to scrub through here, you can see how the ship will change orientation. You see right through here, it actually flips over, again, because of the normal direction of the curve. You see right through there, if I zoom in, it actually flips upside down, like that, as it comes in for a landing. So again, it's using the normal direction of the curve itself to determine which way is up. That's probably not the most desirable option. So I think it's easiest to either use your scene up, if your scene is a standard scene configuration, or if you wanted to use a vector like is the default value, you can specify which direction's up by typing, in this case, 1 in the y-axis here. All right, so that was the world up and everything that goes along with that. And then we have parametric length turned on or off. Again, let's really remind you of the U value. I'll get rid of this cube. The U value is the keyframe set at frame 1 and 100 for the ship moving along the path at that speed. So as I move the ship along the path by scrubbing through the time slider, you can see that U value changed between the values of 0 and 1, right? Okay. So if I turn on parametric length, and now I scrub through here, the ship itself still moves like it was before. However, as I get to frame 100, the U value is set to 13 instead of 1. because it's using a parametric length instead of what was considered before the parametric space. Let me scroll back here to frame 1. So let me select the curve here and let's try and explain this a little bit better. So let's go to the curve shape node, and you see here we have min-max value of 0 to 13. This is the parameter value of the curve. We have 13 spans, and it's a cubic or 3-degree curve. Okay, so I have a video going over the rebuild curve command. If I go back to the modeling menu set, curves, we have rebuild curve options. And in here, you can change, for example, the parameter range. You can change it to be 0 to 1, or you can keep what you have when you rebuild the curve, or you can specify 0 to number of spans. In this case, 13 spans. But if you were to say 0 to number of spans and then change the number of spans to 4, then you're changing your parameter values from 0 to 4. Okay? So 0 to 1 is one option. You can keep it the way it is or change it based on the number of spans you rebuild the curve to. So I'm not going to do that right now, but I'm just trying to explain what this parameterization value is. So the parameter value is pretty much trying to specify a point on the curve. All right? So the min-max value of this curve is 0 to 13. So when I go back to the motion path and I tell it to use parametric length, you're telling it to use a value between 0 and 13 because that's the parameter of the curve. If the parameter of the curve changed, then this values here for the u value would also change. So the u value is a point on the curve and using parametric length or parametric space. So parametric space, like it was before, goes from 0 to 1. So everywhere on this curve goes from 0 to 1. So if you're halfway through the path, you're at a u value of 0.5. However, parametric length, the u value is 13. So is that a big deal? It's kind of up to you. It depends on what it is that you're needing to do. Like going from 0 to 1 does give you the option of knowing that setting a value of 0.5 is going to be the dead center of the curve. A value of 0.25 is going to be 1/4 of the length of the curve. You know that for a fact. With a value of 13, then the middle of the curve would be, for example, 6.5, which is a little bit more clunky to work with. However, you don't have such a small value range. You have a much longer range between 0 and 13 to work with. So there's pros and cons. So what else can we do with this? Right now I can rewind this, press play. Again, the ship is traveling along the path and goes from frame 1 to frame 100. So how would I want to change that after the fact? A few different things you can do. You can actually click on this frame 100 to actually select it. You can see here, it turns into this yellow diamond shape, and I can click and drag on the curve, and I can change where on the curve frame 100 ends up being. For example, if I move back here, and now I press play, the ship stops there on the curve instead of at the very end. So you're not limited to using the entire curve. You can use just certain points on the curve. I can do the same for frame 1. I can click it and then drag it to a specific area on the curve. And then as I rewind and hit play, the ship just moves back and forth between those 2 points, between frames 1 and 100. So how do I change this now? Instead of taking 100 frames to get from here to here, let's say I want to only take 50 frames or something like that. Well, let's select the ship and let's open up the graph editor. Go to Windows, Animation Editors, Graph Editor. So here's the graph editor. Let's pull it open here. With the cone or the spaceship selected, you can see I have Translate XYZ and Rotate XYZ, and they're all being controlled by this Motion Path 1 U value. And when any of these I select, I get the same curve, the same animation curve here. If I select the first frame, you can see here is at frame 1 and a value of 0.33, and that's the U value. So right here, frame 1, I've moved it up, but remember we're still using parametric space, not length. So the U value is 0.33. So right here I'm about 1/3 along the length of the curve, a U value of 0.33. If I click on this keyframe, frame 100 with a value of 0.487. So right here, we're a little bit before halfway along the curve. So right here, these are the stats. This first box is the keyframe. The second box is the value. So I can click on this keyframe. I can select this keyframe and change this value however much I want. So for example, if I select this keyframe and say instead of frame 100, let's make this frame 30. Enter. So now I rewind, hit play. It goes much faster. If the number still says 100, and as I click on it, it updates. Instead of saying 100 now, it says 30, like it should. So I can change that timing to be only 1 second instead of 3.5 or 3 1/3. So again, the graph editor is where you'll go to change those numbers here. Now another thing to keep in mind, the shape of this curve I have, let me move this over, this shape indicates a slow start and then a slow stop. See if I can, let me actually change this to be a bit longer. Let's say 60 frames. So if I select this keyframe, and instead of a U value of 0.487, which makes that point right here on the curve, let me type in 0.75 and hit enter. You see how I moved that point further down the curve. So it's at 60 frames, now the frame 60, so it would take 2 seconds, and I moved it further down the curve by changing that U value to 0.75. If I click it, it'll update to 60 instead of 30. So as I watch the ship fly in, it might be a little bit subtle, but the ship starts and then speeds up and then slows down as it reaches the end. So by adjusting that motion path shape, again, I need to make sure I have the ship selected to see it. By adjusting the path shape here, we can control how the ship moves between these 2 points and the speed at which it goes. So for example, if I select this path, I have these 2 tangent handles that come off of it. Same here, select these 2 keyframes, tangent handles appear off the side of them. You can select these handles, middle mouse click and drag to change the shape. And you can see on the left how the ship actually is moving just by me pulling and pushing on this tangent handle. So if I do it like this, for example, so I have this really sharp sloping curve through here. What this means, if I look at it and see what I expect to have happen, is the ship's going to start out slowly and then speed up to the end. So let me rewind, hit play. So that's exactly what happened. Ship starts slow, speeds up, all the way to the end. Now I can change the shape. Again, I'm middle mouse clicking and dragging. Let me do the kind of inverse of that. I have this hill shape to the curve. The ship's going to move really fast at first and then slow down as it reaches its destination. Fast, then slow. That's with this hill shape. So you have that plateau, that slope or the hill. You can determine which end the ship kind of slows down on. And you can, of course, change this to be much more dramatic. Now let's see what happens. It actually starts out incredibly fast, backs up, and then goes back in. So that's what this shape of the curve allows us to do. So you can definitely have a lot of fun playing with the ship's speed by messing with the animation curve shape in the graph editor. Now there are some other motion path commands here. Motion paths, there are flow path object, set motion path key. We'll get to those in future videos, but I wanted to cover the main thing, which was attaching something to a motion path and then editing that motion path and how it all works. But yeah, creating a motion path I think it's pretty fun, especially for flying spaceships and things like that. You can attach a camera to a path, which can be very handy based on animations, and if you want to do some kind of fly through. Just keep in mind if you want to have the follow on or not, where the camera will follow the shape of the path, or if you want the camera to stay looking at a certain direction as it moves along a path. Like if you wanted it to follow along the side of a vehicle, you want it to point at the vehicle all the time, even if the curve changes direction. So that's one instance where follow would not necessarily be wanted for a camera in that sense. But in any case, hope you enjoyed this video on motion paths and learned a little bit about how they work. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to post them in the comment section of the video. Thanks again for watching, and I'll talk to you later.